Hello everyone, welcome to the first video here on my channel where I'm using the new username SleeplessMTG. Going forward, this is going to be my username for the channel. I really like it. It really is a lot better than the other one in my opinion. So yeah, so this is my commander deck tech for Tovolar Dire Overlord. This is a werewolf tribal deck that's all about flooding the board with werewolves and wolves and then doing what Gruul does best, which is just smashing face. So I really hope you guys enjoy this video. I decided to arrange the deck using CMC rather than just alphabetically, so if you guys like that more, just let me know. And yeah, let's jump right into what Tovolar does. Alrighty, so Tovolar Dire Overlord is a 3-mana, 3/3 legendary creature human werewolf with Daybound. So, for anyone who doesn't know, this is the day and night token. So it becomes day or night, or if it becomes day or night, or if a daybound permanent enters the battlefield, track day or night for the rest of the game. As it becomes day, transform all nightbound permanents. If a player casts no spells during their own turn, it becomes night next turn. And night says, as it becomes night, transform all daybound permanents. Permanents enter the battlefield nightbound. And if a player casts at least 2 spells during their own turn, it becomes day next turn. So basically, if no one casts any spells, it'll become night. And then all of your werewolves will transform into their more bestial forms. So Tovolar will reflect that. He says, so his abilities here are whenever a wolf or werewolf you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more wolves and or werewolves, it becomes night. Then transform any number of human werewolves you control. So his backside here is Tovolar, the Midnight Scourge. He is a legendary creature werewolf, and he's a 4/4. And he also says whenever a wolf or werewolf you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. And then you can pay X, red and green, and target wolf or werewolf you control gets +X/+0 and gains trample until end of turn, and he has Nightbound. So Tovolar kind of fixes what was a huge problem running werewolves and EDH, and that is that there wasn't really a good way to flip all of your human werewolves, because the original werewolves from the earlier Innistrad sets, they didn't have day and night mechanics. All they had was that if no player cast the spells that turn, they would flip. And that's really hard to do, especially in EDH, wherein everyone's casting as many things as possible. It's just going to be very difficult. So he fixes that problem by flipping it to night, so it'll flip all of your daybound werewolves, and then your older werewolves, that's last line of text, he'll force flip them. So that's super good. And then being able to draw cards in the command zone is always an amazing thing, especially for only 3 mana. So let's jump into the deck tech here, and we'll go ahead and start with Planeswalkers. So we have 2 Planeswalkers. Our first one being Arlinn Kord. This is a 4-mana legendary Planeswalker, Arlinn, who starts at 3 loyalty. She has a +1 loyalty ability. Until end of turn, up to 1 target creature gets +2/+2 and gains vigilance and haste. And then you can 0 loyalty to put a 2/2 green wolf creature token onto the battlefield, then transform Arlinn Kord. So she will transform into Arlinn Embraced by the Moon. So she's still a legendary Planeswalker, Arlinn. It doesn't say the loyalty, but she just has whatever loyalty was on the front side. And she has a +1 loyalty that says creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain trample until end of turn. You have a -1 that says Arlinn Embraced by the Moon deals 3 damage to target creature or player. Then you transform Arlinn Embraced by the Moon. And then -6, you get an emblem with creatures you control have haste and tap. This creature deals damage equal to its power to target creature or player. Okay, our next Planeswalker is Arlinn the Pack's Hope. This is a 4-mana legendary Planeswalker, Arlinn. She starts at 4 loyalty. She has Daybound, and then +1 until your next turn. You may cast creature spells as though they had flash, and each creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. Then you can -3 to create 2 2/2 green wolf creature tokens, and she will transform, if it becomes night, to Arlinn the Moon's Fury. She is a 4 loyalty legendary Planeswalker, Arlinn. She has Nightbound. You can +2 loyalty to add red and green, and you can 0 loyalty until end of turn. Arlen the Moon's Fury becomes a 5/5 werewolf creature with trample, indestructible, and haste. Very cool having a planeswalker become a creature. I love that. All right, next we're going to go into our creatures, and we'll start with the 1 mana spot. We have Ascendant Pack Leader, a 1 mana 2/1 creature wolf. Ascendant Pack Leader enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it if you control a permanent with mana value 4 or greater. And whenever you cast a creature spell with mana value 4 or greater, you put a +1/+1 counter on Ascendant Pack Leader. So remember, Tovolar will trigger with werewolves and wolves, so we're going to run a couple wolves in this deck as well. All right, next up we got 2 mana spots. We have Duskwatch Recruiter. This is a 2 mana 2/2 creature, human warrior werewolf. You can pay 3 mana to look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. And then at the beginning of each upkeep, if no spells were cast last turn, transform Duskwatch Recruiter. So this is one of those old werewolves that doesn't have Daybound or Nightbound, so it only transforms if no one casts any spells. But if you have Tovolar, he'll just go ahead and force that. Next up, he'll flip into a Kralin Horde Howler. This is a 3/3 creature werewolf who says creature spells you cast costs 1 colorless less to cast. And then at the beginning of each upkeep, if a player casts 2 or more spells last turn, you transform Kralin Horde Howler. All right, next up is our first and one of very few non-werewolf or wolf creatures. This is Goblin and Narcomancer. This is a 2 mana 2/2 creature goblin shaman that says each spell you cast that's red or green costs 1 less to cast. So you won't be able to draw cards if this guy connects, but I mean, this guy is super good in Gruul decks, especially in decks like this where you want to go as fast as possible, and your mana value is super low. So he'll just help out make that deck even faster. Kessig Naturalist is up next, a 2 mana 2/2 creature human werewolf. He says, whenever Kessig Naturalist attacks, you add red or green. Until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. And he's got Daybound. So he will go ahead and transform into Lord of the Ulvenwald, who is a 3/3 creature werewolf. He says, other wolves and werewolves you control get +1/+1. And whenever he attacks, add red or green. Until end of turn, you don't lose mana as steps and phases end. And then he has Nightbound. Our next 2 mana creature is Mayor of Avabruck. This is a 2 mana 1/1 creature human advisor werewolf. He says other human creatures you control get +1/+1. At the beginning of each upkeep, if no spells were cast last turn, you transform Mayor of Avabruck. And he's going to transform into Howlpack Alpha, a 3/3 creature werewolf who says other werewolf and wolf creatures you control get +1/+1. At the beginning of your end step, put a 2/2 green wolf creature token onto the battlefield. And at the beginning of each upkeep, if a player casts 2 or more spells last turn, transform Howlpack Alpha. Metallic Mimic is our next creature, a 2 mana 2/1 artifact creature shapeshifter. As it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Metallic Mimic is the chosen type in addition to its other types, and each other creature you control of the chosen type enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. So we'll just choose werewolves most of the time. You can also choose wolves if you want, but werewolves is going to be the way to go. And speaking of werewolves, we have Outland Liberator, a 2 mana 2/2 creature human werewolf that says pay 1 mana, sacrifice Outland Liberator, destroy target artifact or enchantment, and it has Daybound. And it will transform into Frenzied Trapbreaker, a 3/3 creature werewolf who has the same ability of paying 1 to sacrifice it and destroy target artifact or enchantment. And then it also gains whenever Frenzied Trapbreaker attacks, destroy target artifact or enchantment defending player controls, and it has Nightbound. Packsong Pup, up next, a 2 mana 1/1 creature wolf. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control another wolf or werewolf, put a +1/+1 counter on Packsong Pup. When Packsong Pup dies, you gain life equal to its power. The cutest freaking good boy, and this card is really good, especially if you play it early and you keep pumping it up. Our next 2 mana creature is Scorned Villager, a 2-mana 1/1 creature human werewolf that taps for green, and then at the beginning of each upkeep, if no spells were cast last turn, transform Scorned Villager, who's going to transform into Moon-Scarred Werewolf. This is a 2-mana, or sorry, I keep saying that, a 2/2 creature werewolf who has Vigilance. You can tap it for 2 green mana, and then at the beginning of each upkeep, if a player casts 2 or more spells last turn, transform Moon-Scarred Werewolf. Our next creature, our final 2-mana creature actually, is a werewolf that will not transform. This is a 2-mana, this is Werewolf Pack Leader, a 2-mana 3/3 creature human werewolf that has Pack Tactics. Whenever Werewolf Pack Leader attacks, if you attacked with creatures with total power 6 or greater this combat, draw a card, and then you can pay 4 mana until end of turn. Werewolf Pack Leader has base power and toughness 5/3, gains trample, and isn't a human. So it kind of has transform, but it doesn't flip. Alright, next up we got 3-mana creatures. We'll start off with Breakneck Rider, a 3-mana 3/3 creature human scout werewolf that says at the beginning of each upkeep, if no spells were cast last turn, transform Breakneck Rider. And Breakneck Rider transforms into Neckbreaker, who is a 4/3 creature werewolf. Attacking creatures you control get +1/+0 and have trample. At the beginning of each upkeep, if a player casts 2 or more spells last turn, transform Neckbreaker. Cemetery Prowler is our next creature, a 3-mana 3/4 creature wolf. It's got Vigilance. Whenever Cemetery Prowler enters the battlefield or attacks, exile a card from a graveyard. Spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each card type they share with cards exiled with Cemetery Prowler. And this will stack, so if you exile 2 creatures from graveyards, your creatures will cost 2 less. Gyre Reach Bandit is up next, a 3/2 3-mana creature human rogue werewolf that has haste. At the beginning of each upkeep, if no spells were cast last turn, transform Gyre Reach Bandit. And it's going to transform into Vilden Pack Alpha, a 4/3 creature werewolf. Whenever a werewolf enters the battlefield under your control, you may transform it. At the beginning of each upkeep, if a player casts 2 or more spells last turn, transform Vilden Pack Alpha. So this can be good if you don't have Tovolar, or if you play something that's night bound. Force that transformation again. Hermit of the Natternolls is a 3-mana 2/3 creature human werewolf. Whenever an opponent casts a spell during your turn, draw a card. At the beginning of each upkeep, if no spells were cast last turn, transform Hermit of the Natternolls, which will transform into Lone Wolf of the Natternolls, a 3/5 creature werewolf. Whenever an opponent casts a spell during your turn, draw 2 cards, and at the beginning of each upkeep, if a player casts 2 or more spells last turn, transform it. We have Hound Tamer, 3-mana 3/3 creature human werewolf that has trample. You can pay 4 mana to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, and it has Daybound. And the backside here is Untamed Pup, a 4/4 creature werewolf that has trample. Other wolves and werewolves you control have trample, and you can pay 4 to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature and Nightbound. Immerwolf is up next, a 3-mana 2/2 creature wolf that has Intimidate, so it can only be blocked it can't be blocked except by artifact creatures and/or creatures that share a color with it. Other wolf and werewolf creatures you control get +1/+1, and non-human werewolves you control can't transform. So this card is interesting because it can be both good and bad. I think it's a lot better in the late game, especially if you're casting more spells on your turn, so your werewolves don't transform. But there are some werewolves in this deck that when they transform, they do something, and not being able to transform them can kind of hurt you a little bit. But other than that, this card is very good, and it's a good lord, so just be wary with it. Cruel Outlaw is our next creature, a 3-mana 2/2 creature human rogue werewolf that has First Strike, and then if no players cast a spell, or if no players cast a spell during their turn, you transform it. And it transforms into Terror of Cruin Pass, 3/3 creature werewolf that has Double Strike, and each werewolf you control can't be blocked except by 2 or more creatures, and at the beginning of each upkeep, if a player casts 2 or more spells last turn, transform it. So it just gives all your werewolves menace. Primal Adversary is up next, a 3 mana 4/3 with a creature wolf that has trample, and when Primal Adversary enters the battlefield, you can pay 2 mana any number of times. When you pay this cost one or more times, put that many +1/+1 counters on Primal Adversary, then up to that many target lands you control become 3/3 wolf creature tokens with haste that are still lands. Realmwalker is our next creature, a 3 mana 2/3 creature shapeshifter that has changeling, so it's every creature card, or every creature type. As it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. You may look at the top card of your library anytime. You may cast creature spells of the chosen type from the top of your library. Rounding up our 3 mana spot is Reckless Stormseeker, a 3 mana 2/3 creature human werewolf that says at the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gets +1/+0 and gains haste until end of turn, and it has Daybound. So it's going to transform here into Stormcharge Slasher, a 3/4 creature werewolf that says at the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gets +2/+0 and gains trample and haste until end of turn, and Nightbound. Next up, we got our 4 mana creatures. We have Afflicted Deserter, a 4 mana 3/2 creature human werewolf. At the beginning of each upkeep, if no spells were cast last turn, you transform it. And it transforms into Werewolf Ransacker, a 5/4 creature werewolf. Whenever this creature transforms into Werewolf Ransacker, you may destroy target artifact. If that artifact is put into a graveyard this way, Werewolf Ransacker deals 3 damage to that artifact's controller. At the beginning of each upkeep, if a player casts 2 or more spells last turn, you transform it. Howlpack Piper is up next. 4 mana 2/2 creature human werewolf. This spell can't be countered. You can pay 2 and tap. You may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. If it's a wolf or werewolf, untap Howlpack Piper. Activate only as a sorcery, and it has Daybound. It'll transform into Wild Song Howler, a 4/4 creature werewolf. Whenever this creature enters the battlefield or transforms into Wild Song Howler, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order, and it has Nightbound. Huntmaster of the Fells is a 4 mana 2/2 creature human werewolf. Whenever this creature enters the battlefield or transforms into Huntmaster of the Fells, put a 2/2 green wolf creature token onto the battlefield and you gain 2 life. At the beginning of each upkeep, if no spells were cast last turn, you transform it. It'll transform into Ravager of the Fells, a 4/4 creature werewolf that has trample. Whenever this creature transforms into Ravager of the Fells, it deals 2 damage to target opponent and 2 damage to up to 1 target creature that player controls. At the beginning of each upkeep, if a player casts 2 or more spells last turn, transform Ravager of the Fells. Ill-Tempered Loner is a 4 mana 3/3 creature human werewolf. Whenever Ill-Tempered Loner is dealt damage, it deals that much damage to any target. You can pay 2, and Ill-Tempered Loner gets +2/+0 until end of turn, and it has Daybound. And it will transform here, if I can actually grab it, into Howlpack Avenger, a 4/4 creature werewolf. Whenever a permanent you control is dealt damage, Howlpack Avenger deals that much damage to any target, and you can pay 2, and it'll get +2/+0 until end of turn. It has Nightbound. So this card will, if you have a big board, this card will more than likely win you the game, because if your opponents don't block, they'll have to take a bunch of damage. If they do block, this guy's just going to shoot them for a bunch more damage. And if you have this guy out and play Blasphemous Act, it might win you the game. So, very fun card. Oh, you're seeing my cheat codes for all my mana costs. This is our final 4 mana creature, which is Instigator Gang, a 2/3 creature human werewolf. Attacking creatures you control get +1/+0. At the beginning of each upkeep, if no spells were cast last turn, you transform it. It'll transform into Wild Blood Pack, a 5/5 with creature werewolf with trample. Attacking creatures you control get +3/+0, and at the beginning of each upkeep, if a player casts 2 or more spells last turn, transform Wild Blood Pack. 5 mana creatures. We have another non-werewolf. This is Karlach, Fury of Avernus, a 5 mana 5/4 legendary creature, Tiefling Barbarian. that says, whenever you attack, if it's the first combat phase this turn, untap all attacking creatures. They gain first strike until end of turn. After this phase, there's an additional combat phase, and you can choose a background, but that won't matter. And our final non-werewolf creature is Oran Frostfang, a 5-mana 2/6 snow creature snake that says attacking creatures you control have death touch, and whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. There's a lot of trample synergies in this deck, and if you don't know, a creature with death strike or death touch and trample will just assign 1 combat damage to blockers, and the rest will go through. So our next 5-mana creature is Sage of Ancient Lore, a star creature with human shaman werewolf. Sage of Ancient Lore's power and toughness are each equal to the number of cards in your hand. When he enters the battlefield, draw a card, and at the beginning of each upkeep, if no spells were cast last turn, you transform it. Transforms into Werewolf of Ancient Hunger, a star creature werewolf that has vigilance and trample. And Werewolf of Ancient Hunger's power and toughness are each equal to the total number of cards in all players' hands, which is quite ridiculous if it's late in the game and everyone is drawing cards. At the beginning of each upkeep, if a player casts 2 or more spells last turn, transform Werewolf of Ancient Hunger. Ulrich of the Krallen Horde is the only other legendary werewolf. He is a 5-mana 4/4 legendary creature, human werewolf, that says, whenever this creature enters the battlefield or transforms into Ulrich of the Krallen Horde, target creature gets +4/+4 until end of turn. At the beginning of each upkeep, if no spells were cast last turn, you transform him. And he transforms into Ulrich Uncontested Alpha, a 6/6 legendary creature werewolf that says, whenever this creature transforms into Ulrich Uncontested Alpha, you may have it fight target non-werewolf creature you don't control, and at the beginning of each upkeep, if a player casts 2 or more spells last turn, you transform him. Our final 5-mana creature is Volatile Arsonist, a 5-mana 4/4 creature human werewolf that has menace and haste. Whenever it attacks, it deals 1 damage to each of up to 1 target creature, up to 1 target player, and or up to 1 target planeswalker, and it has Daybound. And it will transform into Dire Strain Anarchist, a 5/5 creature werewolf with menace and haste. Whenever it attacks, it'll instead deal 2 damage to each of up to 1 target creature, up to 1 target player, and up to 1 target planeswalker, and it has Nightbound. Alrighty. And finally, we have our 6-mana creatures. This is probably my favorite werewolf in the deck. This is Avabruck Caretaker. This is a 6-mana 4/4 creature human werewolf that has hexproof. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put 2 +1/+1 counters on another target creature you control, and it has Daybound. And it'll transform into Hollowhenge Huntmaster, a 6/6 creature werewolf that has hexproof. Other permanents you control have hexproof, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, put 2 +1/+1 counters on each creature you control, and it has Nightbound. This card is insane. I absolutely love it. The art is phenomenal too. This is by far my favorite werewolf in the deck. And our final creature here is Tovolar's Huntmaster, a 6-mana 6/6 that is a creature human werewolf, and it says, when Tovolar's Huntmaster enters the battlefield, create 2 2/2 green wolf creature tokens, and it has Daybound. Transforms into Tovolar's Pack Leader, a 7/7 creature werewolf. Whenever Tovolar's Pack Leader enters the battlefield or attacks, create 2 2/2 green wolf creature tokens, and you can pay 4 mana. Another target wolf or werewolf you control fights target creature you don't control, and it has Nightbound. Alright, now we're going to jump into sorceries, and we will start with 2-mana sorceries. We have Farseek, 2-mana sorcery, search your library for a plains, island, swamp, or a mountain card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Into the North is a 2-mana sorcery that says search your library for a snowland card and put it into play tapped, then shuffle your library. We are running snowlands in this deck, and I'll explain more of that in the land section. We have Nature's Lore, a 2-mana sorcery that says search your library for a forest, put it into play. This is an old card, so I'm not going to read the weird text, but you do shuffle your deck after. Shatter Skull Smashing is a X 2-mana card. It is a sorcery that says Shatter Skull Smashing deals X damage divided as you choose among up to 2 target creatures and or planeswalkers. If X is 6 or more, it deals twice X damage divided as you choose among them instead. And on the backside, you can instead play it as a land, which is Shatter Skull, the Hammer Pass, a land that as it enters the battlefield, you may pay 3 life. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped, and it taps for red. And our final 2-mana sorcery is 3 Visits, a sorcery that searches for a forest, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. For 3-mana sorceries, we have Balaged Recovery, a sorcery that says return target card from your graveyard to your hand, and if you want, you can instead play it on the backside here, which is Balaged Sanctuary, a land that enters the battlefield tapped, and you can tap it for green. Our final 3-mana sorcery is Cultivate. Sorcery, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, reveal those cards, put 1 onto the battlefield, tapped, and the other into your hand, then shuffle your library. We have 4-mana sorceries, and we only have 1. It's going to be Triumph of the Hordes, a 4-mana sorcery that says until end of turn, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain trample and infect. So creatures with infect deal damage to creatures in the form of -1/-1 counters and to players in the form of poison counters. So if a player gets 10 poison counters, they lose the game. So this is your finishing move, one of them. Our final sorcery is at 9 mana. This is Blasphemous Act, but you're never going to cast it for 9. It's a sorcery that costs 1 less to cast for each creature on the battlefield, and it will deal 13 damage to each creature. All right, we got instants up next. First up in our 2-mana spot, we have Gruul Charm, an instant that says choose 1. Creatures without flying can't block this turn, or gain control of all permanents you own, or Gruul Charm deals 3 damage to each creature with flying. Heroic Intervention is a 2-mana instant that says permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. And our final 2-mana instant is Rapid Vigor, 2-mana instant that says regenerate each creature you control. In 3-mana instants, we have Beast Within, an instant that says destroy target permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green beast creature token. And our final instant is Deflecting Swat, a 3-mana instant that says if you control a commander, you may cast this spell without paying its mana cost. You may choose new targets for target spell or ability. We're going to do artifacts next. Our first artifact is a 2-mana one. This is Lightning Greaves, an artifact equipment. Equipped creature has haste and shroud, and you can equip it for 0. So it can't be the target of spells or abilities, including your own. For our 3-mana spot for the artifacts, we have Herald's Horn, an artifact that says as it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Creature spells you cast of the chosen type cost 1 less to cast. At the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. If it's a creature card of the chosen type, you may reveal it and put it into your hand. Our final 3-mana artifact is the Celestus. This is the only mana rock in the deck. It is a legendary artifact that says if it's neither day nor night, it becomes day as the Celestus enters the battlefield. You can tap it to add 1 mana of any color, and you can pay 3 mana to tap it. If it's night, it becomes day. Otherwise, it becomes night. Activate only as a sorcery. And then whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, you gain 1 life. You may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. And finally, we have our final artifact here, which is the Great Henge, a 9-mana legendary artifact. It costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. You can tap it for 2 green, and you gain 2 life. And then whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and you draw a card. All right, for enchantments, we have our first one, which is Exploration, a 1-mana enchantment that says you may play an additional land on each of your turns. This is really good, especially to include in decks that draw you a bunch of cards, and Tovolar is a deck that draws you a bunch of cards. Next up, we got 2-mana enchantments. We have Full Moon Rise, a enchantment that says werewolf creatures you control get +1/+0 and have trample, and you can sacrifice it to regenerate all werewolf creatures you control. A little bit of a brain fart there. All right, we have 3 mana enchantments, with starting off with Aggravated Assault, an enchantment. You can pay 5 to untap all creatures you control. If it's a main phase, there's an additional combat phase followed by an additional main phase. Activate only as a sorcery. So this card will go infinite with another card in the deck, which I'll explain more, but I'm not the biggest fan of going infinite. So this is definitely, if this becomes really bad, where I keep hitting this infinite, I will take it out, but I'll elaborate more later. We have Garruk's Uprising as our next 3 mana enchantment. It says, whenever Garruk's Uprising enters the battlefield, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. Creatures you control have trample, and whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. Howling Moon is a 3 mana enchantment that says, at the beginning of combat on your turn, target wolf or werewolf you control gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Whenever an opponent casts their second spell each turn, create a 2/2 green wolf creature token. Howlpack Resurgence, 3 mana enchantment that has flash, and each creature you control that's a wolf or werewolf gets +1/+1 and has trample. Rhythm of the Wild, a 3 mana enchantment. Creature spells you control can't be countered. Non-token creatures you control have Riot, so they enter the battlefield with your choice of a +1/+1 counter or haste. Rising the Day is a 3 mana enchantment. Creatures you control have haste. Legendary creatures you control get +1/+0. And our final enchantment in the 3 mana spot is Tribute to the World Tree. And it says, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card if its power is 3 or greater. Otherwise, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. For the 4 mana enchantments, we have Bear Umbra. So this is the other part of the infinite combo. It is an enchantment, Aura. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and has, whenever this creature attacks, untap all lands you control, and it has Totem Armor. If enchanted creature would be destroyed, instead remove all damage from it and destroy this aura. So if you have both these cards out, and this attached to a creature, you attack with the creature, untap all your lands, pay 5, there's another combat step, attack with the creature, pay 5. So the reason I did include this is because this is pretty situational, in which you need a big enough board and you need enough opponents to not have blockers. And it's a little bit slower than just playing a card and then milling yourself out and winning that way or something. But this could be likely to change depending on how potent it is. Like I said, I really do not like playing infinite combos. I think they're kind of boring, and it just makes your power level so much higher. So yeah. But they're 2 good cards on their own. So we have Guardian Project up next, a 4 mana enchantment that says, whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it doesn't have the same name as another creature you control or a creature card in your graveyard, draw a card. Molten Echoes will round out our 4 mana spot for enchantments. As it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Whenever a non-token creature of the chosen type enters the battlefield under your control, create a token that's a copy of that creature. The token gains haste. Exile it at the beginning of the next end step. For 5 mana enchantments, we have Berserker's Onslaught that says, attacking creatures you control have double strike. And our final enchantment is Unnatural Growth, a 5 mana enchantment that says, at the beginning of each combat, double the power and toughness of each creature you control until end of turn. So another good game winner right there. All right, and next up we got lands. We'll start off with Boseiju, Who Endures, a legendary land that taps for green, and you can channel it, so you can pay 2, discarding it, and destroying target artifact, enchantment, or non-basic land an opponent controls. That player may search their library for a land card with a basic land type, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature you control. Castle Embereth is a land that enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a mountain. It taps for red. or you can pay 3 mana and creatures you control get fire breathing, so they get +1/+0 until end of turn. Castle Garenbrig is a land that enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a forest. It taps for green, and you can pay 4 and tap it to add 6 green. Spend this mana only to cast creature spells or activate abilities of creatures. Cavern of Souls is next, a land that enters the battlefield. Choose a creature type, taps for colorless, or you can tap it for 1 mana of any color. Spend this mana only to cast a creature spell of the chosen type, and that spell can't be countered. Cinderglade is a land, mountain, forest that taps for red or green, and it enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. Got Command Tower, of course, taps for 1 mana of any color, or the mana is your 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. Copperline Gorge is a land that enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or fewer other lands, and it taps for red or green. We have Crag Crown Pathway that taps for red, or you can play it on the other side here, which is Timber Crown Pathway that taps for green. We have Faceless Haven, the whole reason we're running Snowlands in this deck. This is a Snowland that taps for colorless, and you can pay 3 snow mana. Faceless Haven becomes a 4/3 creature with vigilance, and it's all creature types until end of turn. It's still a land. So in the late game, this can be another source of card draw or werewolf damage. So that's why we're running it. Grove of the Burn Willows is an interesting land. It taps for colorless, or you can tap it for red or green, and each opponent gains 1 life. We have Handweir Battlements, a land that taps for colorless. You can pay red and tap it. Target creature gains haste until end of turn. And you have a meld ability here, which does not matter at all because we're not running the other meld part. So we're just trying to give things haste. Highland Forest is a snow land, mountain forest. It taps for red or green, and it enters the battlefield tapped. Karplusan Forest is up next, a land that taps for colorless, or it taps for red or green, and it deals 1 damage to you. We have Kessig Wolfrun, a land that taps for colorless. You can pay X, red and green, and tap it. Target creature gets +X/+0 and gains trample until end of turn. If we're drawing a bunch of cards, we're going to run Reliquary Tower. You have no max hand size, and it taps for colorless. Rockfall Vale is up next, as it enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands, and it taps for red or green. Rootbound Crag is just going to check. It'll enter the battlefield tapped unless you control a mountain or forest, and it taps for red or green. Got Secluded Courtyard. As it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type, taps for colorless, or you add 1 mana of any color. Spend this mana only to cast a creature spell of the chosen type or activate an ability of a creature or creature card of the chosen type. Got Sokenzan, Crucible of Defiance, a legendary land that taps for red, and you can channel it by paying 4 and discarding it. Crucible of Defiance, create 2 1/1 colorless spirit creature tokens. They gain haste until end of turn. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature you control. Spire Garden enters the battlefield tapped unless you have 2 or more opponents. Taps for red or green. We have one of my national park lands, which is Stomping Ground. A land, mountain, forest, taps for red or green. As it enters the battlefield, you may pay 2 life. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped. This is the Great Smoky Mountains in North Carolina. And then on the other side here, it's the same thing, but it's Redwood National Park in California. Unclaimed Territory is up next, a land that enters the battlefield. Choose a creature type. It adds for colorless, or you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color. Spend this mana only to cast a creature spell of the chosen type. And finally, for our non-basic lands, we have Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth, that makes all lands forests. It's a legendary land. And rounding out the deck here, we have 5 snowlands, basic snowlands of each type. So we have 5 forests, snow-covered forests, and 5 snow-covered plains, or snow-covered mountain. Jeez, the brain is just not working right now. Alrighty, so that has been my Tovolar Dire Overlord deck. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know if you prefer this formatting or if you just prefer alphabetical order. And yeah, hopefully you guys enjoy. Make sure you leave a like, comment, and subscribe, all that good stuff. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.